welcome to the first episode of Just Three Workplace Gurus, a new podcast about the real world of work.
Hi, I'm Amy.
I'm Mike.
I'm Vivienne.
The podcast is dedicated to the reality of work in or outside of the office environment in this post-COVID world. What's working, what's not, how is our work-life balance, and a lot more. Today, we'll tell you a little bit about us, how we met, each of our careers, and why we decided to start this podcast. Then we'll dive into sort of the current state of office work and what we're hearing. We're glad to have you. So let's talk about our first office work experience. Viv, do you want to talk about that? Because I think it might be fun just to share, like, what was that experience like?
Sure.
Particularly for at least one of us in ancient history.
So I had, we could do a whole episode on the weirdest jobs you ever had. So before my first office job, I was a messenger on roller skates. I was a candy girl at the movie theater, and I did this, that, and the other, and everything in between. But when I was in college, between my junior and senior year, I won an internship at New York Life Insurance in New York City. And that was my first real office job. And so I got dressed up, and that was the days of like pantyhose and heels and really uncomfortable clothes in the summertime. And I would trudge every day on the subway, and I'd go to the building. And the building was literally one city square block. So as an intern, I got put into the data processing department. And I was literally number 86 in Unit B. And so I was doing data processing, and I thought I was going to die. It was the most painful job in the world. And I kept thinking, I'm listening to people's conversations, and it's about the weekend, it's about vacation, it's about retirement. And I would look at the clock, and I swear to God, it would go backwards. And I thought, oh, this is not working for me. And I think at the time I equated that with an office job, not the actual job, and nothing to New York Life Insurance, wonderful company. But yeah, and so I lasted about 6 weeks, and then I quit. And my father was really upset with me. He said that was a good job, and that would have the potential for after you graduate, and you're a musician, you need a real job, and musicians never have real jobs. And anyway, so that was my first exposure to an office. And I kind of made a promise after that, which I would never work in an office. Even though in my career, I work with literally thousands who do work in an office.
In an office.
But personally, it didn't work for me.
And you've run a business that doesn't have an office.
We've been virtual since our inception.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That reminds me that we should talk about what we do for a living, but we'll finish this conversation first.
Okay. Anyhow, that was my one and only real office job. Unless temp work counts, because as a musician, I was either waiting tables or I was doing temp work because I was a fast typist. So then I would just bop from office to office, and that was a little more fun because it was a week here, a few days there, and that was a better experience. So that was mine.
Did we all wait tables?
Oh yeah.
Oh, a little bit. Amy did a little bit. Okay, Amy, what was your first office experience?
So I think it's important to talk about a little bit about my history before going into the office. So as many teenagers and middle schoolers, I had a paper route for a long time around my neighborhood, and had to collect the money and on rainy days, bag my newspapers and all of that. And then in seventh grade, my parents opened a donut shop, and I worked. So that's part of my waiting tables.
Where was the donut shop?
Sweet Amy's.
Sweet Amy's.
And it was on Willow Road in Menlo Park.
Oh,
and it grew into sandwiches. It was across the street from the VA, so we had like gifts and balloons and ice cream, and it was a great place. So I somewhat waited on tables, but I was behind the counter. And we had that. And then when I went away to college, I told my parents I was going to franchise the business, and that's what I was studying to do. But come my senior year of college, I decided I wanted an office job. It was the mid 90s, and I saw all these like startups coming up, and I thought it sounded really exciting. So my first job after disappointing my dad that I wasn't going to franchise the business was I worked for an office products company and did cold calling. I dialed for dollars. I knocked on doors and sat in little tiny cubicles with a whole bunch of other people trying to find people to sell office supplies to.
Is that
That's
where we met?
awesome.
Because we
Yeah.
called together, and I don't know if
Yes.
but yeah.
I was pretty there off and on for about 15 years. Yeah.
That's how we met as well, because you sold
Yeah.
office. Yeah.
I
That's right.
knocked on
That's so
your
funny.
door, Mike.
Did you? I thought you already did that work
I
there.
was already in there by the time you got there, but that's how I initially got their business. Yeah.
Lucky you. Oof. So my first off, well, there was one when I was in high school, but that doesn't really count. When I was in college, I thought I was going to go into the family business. My grandfather was in the movie theater business. And so I was working every summer in the office in San Francisco it was on Golden Gate Avenue. And I will start by saying I was not suffering because the president of the company was my grandfather. So, I came in when he came in, I left when he left. If we were going to Tahoe for a month in August, I didn't work, yeah, life was good. But I worked for the senior accounting manager, whose name was John, who was the sweetest guy. Everybody was very nice to me. But we were still, this was in 1980. So we were still sitting at the big metal desk with the 3 drawers on each side and the pencil drawer in the middle and the sort of black, whatever the heck that surface was. And I actually had an adding machine that had a hand crank on it. So cha-chung, cha-chung, and yeah, and we all faced, so we were in a building on Golden Gate, and there were big windows in the back that looked out on an alley, but we were not allowed to look at that direction. We all looked forward. So all the desks were, there were probably 3 rows of these metal desks, and they all faced forward. And the hierarchy was highest level person in front and everybody else in the back. So I sat behind John, and then, whatever. Like, it was just like, that was my first experience. There was no such thing as cubicles then. I certainly had no idea I was going to be a facilities manager in those days, so I didn't really understand the process. But my job was to balance all the accounts. So I learned, the movie theater business meant that every screening room had its own account. And so I balanced, like, I don't know, 40 or 50 accounts a month, checking accounts, which was really kind of interesting. So nobody balances checking accounts anymore, but in my early days, I was really good at that. So that was my first job in an office. So so let me take a step back. We should say what we do, because we didn't talk about that. So I'll dive in and say I manage facilities departments and have done that for 25 years, and I am currently the director of real estate at a tech firm in Northern California. And I should say we're going to try our best not to talk about our jobs and our companies, but just to talk about our experience in general. Viv?
Before I go into me, how did you get into this? You went from the movie theater to facility.
Oh, well, yeah, that's
Some
sort
accounting.
of a tragic story.
Yeah, right.
So by the time I graduated this is very convoluted, but by the time I graduated from college, there wasn't a job for me. The company was having some struggles, so it's too bad, because I always thought that's what I was going to do. So then I didn't really know what I was going to do. I thought I was an English major in college. I thought maybe I'd be an English teacher, blah, blah, blah. I was at some point just married, working in an antique shop, and I realized that I really wanted to be a designer. And so I went back to school, and everybody at this school kept telling me that I had a talent for commercial work, and that was not what I was interested in. But circumstances come together. A friend asked me to apply for a job at Netscape as a moves, ads, and changes coordinator. I don't know if anybody even hires moves coordinators anymore, but that was my job. In my first year, I moved like 4,000 people from cubicle to cubicle. Not physically, I just coordinated that. But at the time, I remember looking down the hall. I tell this story all the time. I looked down the hall at the director of real estate standing at his cubicle, and I thought, oh, I should do that. And because of him and many other people, literally, that is what I do. So I looked at somebody, thought I should do that job, and 25 years later, that's what I do.
You manifested it. Beautiful.
And the thing I find the funniest about it is people talk about us, all of us being subject matter experts. I can't figure out how the hell I became a subject matter expert in facilities, but
Experience, right?
yeah, but and
Yes,
that is true. That is exactly what it is.
So,
exactly.
Mike, I'm curious, when you had to move all of those or plan for the moving of those people, what kind of tools did you have at that time? My guess, did you
Um,
have CAD?
did I what?
Did you have CAD or any like space planning tools?
No, I didn't have to do that. It was mostly just like inventorying what needed to move, coordinating the movers, and I would walk around campus. In those days, like I want to say we had 20 some odd buildings. And so I would just walk from building. I had to in the morning kind of figure out, okay, what's my route? And I had a clipboard basically. And I would walk around and check the to and from locations, make sure I had an inventory of what was moving, and then go to the to location and make sure that cubicle was ready. And if there was any reconfiguration of the cubicle, then I had to have arranged that. That was a different person. And then I would create the inventory and the spreadsheet and coordinate with the movers. And then the movers would come to my desk at like 3 and pick up all the stuff. And then they would go. And I wouldn't stay for the whole thing. And I had a flip phone, like a big ass flip phone, because this was
With an antenna?
1997. And so the guys would call me when they were done or if they had a question during the move. And obviously, I'd been to all the cubicles, so I kind of knew what they were working on. And then I started doing project moves, and then I started doing project construction. And like my first big construction project was a fitness center. I didn't know, I don't know how to build a fitness. What do you do? I don't know. So a lot of it was just sort of flying by the seat of your pants. But God, it's been fun. I love this job. I really do.
I always think it's interesting that what we think we can do, when we're coming out of college or at certain parts of our career, we don't expect to be where we're at today,
No,
right?
we
Like
don't.
that would have never been what we
Totally.
thought we would be doing.
And I think telling our kids that, getting them to realize they don't have to choose today because they're probably going to change their mind. I think that still doesn't, I don't know if it resonates with them for either of you. It certainly hasn't resonated with mine.
They always know more.
Yes, they do. Vivienne, do you want to do a little?
Yeah, so I am the co-founder and president of an ergonomics company. And we are headquartered in the San Francisco Bay Area, but we're global. And we work with everybody from, individuals up to top Fortune 500 companies that have global programs. And if you had told me what you were saying, Amy, that I would have built a prominent global ergonomics and wellness consulting company that helps build ergo programs back when, like graduating college, first of all, I would have said, Ergo, what? What are you talking about? So my whole career was a big accident, which I bumped into sideways because I got very badly injured as a pianist. And as I mentioned before, I was hurt at the piano, and then I was either waiting tables, that really didn't help the injuries, or I was doing temp work, and you want to talk about ergo disaster. And I go from company to company, typing here, typing there, and went to the clinic and said, look, I can't even hold a cup of coffee. And they said, okay, here are some painkillers, cancel your concerts and quit your job. That's not going to work. So to just kind of fast forward the tape, I got very involved in teaching a piano methodology that was designed to help pianists become virtuosos, which inadvertently also helped injured pianists get over their injury. Because much like athletics, if you move well, you function well, right? And that's how I bumped into ergonomics. So I moved to San Francisco, put my piano studio shingle out on the door, and half my students were kids, and the other half were adults who had some kind of issue going on, but came to me because I taught this methodology. And anyhow, and that was how I bumped back into the office life, because they were doing everything right at the piano, but their discomforts were still continuing. And I said, okay, what's going on during the day? Oh, I'm an engineer. Oh, I'm a secretary. Oh, I'm a whatever they were doing. They were on a computer. And so I would say, why don't we go to your office and do a lesson? and basically kind of doing a piano lesson, but at the office. And then I remember going to the library, I'll never forget this, and I kind of looked up like RSI, repetitive strain injury, and that's how I learned that there was a name for this discipline called ergonomics. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I kind of want to do that. And that's how this all started. And literally, I worked in a doctor's office for about 7 years, kind of doing this ergonomics as part of somebody's rehab, and then got really more interested in coming to the scene of the crime and going to the office where these kind of was the culprit of what was happening. And it's been fascinating, not just to help people and grow a beautiful team that we have, but to really literally be inside the culture of so many different companies, from industrial to biotech to the tech sector. So that's been very fascinating to have the vantage point of hearing what an experience through the employees, as well as facilities managers, HR folks, benefits managers, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my story. And Amy.
Well, before you do that, I was going to say, and that's how we met, because
Yeah, that's how
you
we met.
provided ergonomics at a few companies that I've worked at. And yeah.
Yes. And then Amy, I guess we met through that field, and I know we did cold calling together, and perhaps we knocked on your door together, Mike. In fact, you may have introduced us, Amy.
I think I did introduce the two of you. Yeah.
That is entirely possible.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. But that's to be at least 10 years ago.
Oh, longer than that.
You think it was longer than that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
About 15 years ago.
15, if not, yeah. Trying to think of where I was at with children, but yeah, it might even have been longer than 15 even. So for me, now I am the market development manager at a large commercial furniture dealer here in the Bay Area. I found this job about 5 years ago and wish I took this opportunity 20 years ago. Love what I'm doing. And for me, it's all about making connections, which is my favorite part of the job. So really looking at different companies that are out here and seeing how can we look at their culture and their branding and their value statement and create an amazing space for their employees to come to. So that for me has just been a true joy. It's come with its challenges thanks to the pandemic that just we had.
All of us.
When I joined 5 years ago, it was even more exciting. Now we have different challenges, but what I have found over the last few years is not everybody's the same, and everybody needs to be treated very individually within a company, within the different types of market sectors that are out there. So that's great. And the other thing that I've really enjoyed is just making the number of different connections to really have that consultative approach, and a trusted advisor.
Yeah.
You're so cool, Amy.
Really I'm only cool because of the two of you.
No. And I should say the reason we decided to do this was we had done, I don't know, one or two panel discussions. I think I facilitated one, Viv, you facilitated one, and we just really liked talking to each other, and we would get on the phone and think, we should do a podcast. We should talk about work. This would be fun. So that's what we're doing.
Well, and we always have different perspectives of the office. And so that's what I find to be really fun talking to you guys. It gives me things to think about.
Well, I think it's just a really fascinating world. And the change has been, it's upended everything that we all three of us do for a living, what our experiences have been. I love the job that I have, but it's changed so much in the last 3 years. And I joke about this all the time. I thought at this point in my career, I could get a cool job and I'll just skate along for a few more years because I've done this before. This is easy, and then I'll retire. And I have to completely reinvent work. I'm starting all over. And people will. It is like, okay, I'm taking on all kinds of things that I never thought I would take on before. And just which I think is very cool, the experience of thinking about working with employees wherever they work. I started saying this a couple of years ago. I manage workplace, and workplace is wherever you work. I still don't really know what that is or how we're going to do it, but that's the goal now.
And that's an evolving concept, right?
It's
changing all the time and individually. Some people have said they love working from home, and then eventually they start coming in the office, and then they change their tune of that, or maybe their home life isn't as easy to
Changes.
work in anymore, and so they need a different space, and vice versa.
We were talking about this the other day, Vivienne, and I think it would be fun to hear, or interesting to hear some of the pain points in the early days of COVID, the experiences that employees had working from home, because we all had that, and we talked about it a lot, but there were some fascinating stories about the struggles that people had.
Oh, it was intense. I mean, first, just so I'll back up for a second. As a company, as a remote company for the last 25 years or so, that week, remember, we were going to flatten the curve for 2 weeks back in March of 2020. And it was like a cartoon. We just, because at that point, about 95% of our ergo services were on site. So we're very nomadic. And we would go conduct on-site evaluations and trainings, blah, blah, blah. And then, there was a very small number of telecommuters, which have been around for a while. But in 1 week, we saw the calendar. It's like a cartoon where the gopher steals the carrots. It's like, what? Just like one gig just disappeared off the calendar. We're like, oh gosh, now what? And so for a minute, it was very still. I think the whole world was still. And then it was like an avalanche. We started, like, the phone just started ringing nonstop saying, we just got catapulted out of the office into our homes. And there was like a guy who was saying, I never would have bought this condo if I knew I was going to be working here. It's not set up for me to work, right? There were people literally working in the bathtub, not just the bathroom, but in the bathtub, in the closet, in their hammock, in their car. We had one guy who was overseas, and he had 7 roommates. And when he had to do his calls, he would literally sit in the hall with his back against the wall, feet out extended in front of him, laptop head down, so he could have some silence. On top of microwaves. I mean, you name it, it was happening. With a baby here and a toddler over there, and just, this juggling act, and being on Zoom calls and seeing like the 2-year-old come and pull off somebody's glasses, and they happen to be the CEO of a company, and you're like, oh, okay, all barriers are breaking down now. It's just Jim with a kid, But the pain points were really unique and really real. Like people. Yeah. Some people loved it. It was like the best thing that ever happened. Others, like I haven't seen anybody in a year and a half. I'm too afraid to go outside. So, and then we discovered it wasn't just not having a place to work, but it was also, just all of the stress and turmoil that was going on as the world was sort of tilting. So that was fascinating. And to see how people have weathered and come out the other side, it's equally as fascinating.
And some have and some haven't.
Some have and some haven't. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely an evolution. I think we've all, we're all, well, I feel like I'm lucky. I have a room, I have an office, I have a space dedicated. I've got all the nice tools, I have no complaints. I've got a cool chair and a footrest and the right mouse and blah, 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 stuff that Vivienne and I have done together over the years. I feel really lucky, but I know many people are, and I still hear about coworkers and friends who are sitting at their dining room table in a dining chair, or, I mean, I don't know how, I have no idea what Amy's ergonomics is right now.
Not good. Not good. But I have a beautiful background, don't I?
You do. Yes. We love your background. I don't know how you're doing that, because I can't work outside.
I only do it when I have calls in the morning, because I have teenagers who are still sleeping. Yeah.
That's their reality.
So it's actually a nice break in my work when I get to go outside, and it's not hot yet, so it's fine.
That's true. Yeah, it's going to be about 90 today. The problem is, if I put my sunglasses on, then I can't actually see the screen.
Can't see the screen, exactly.
Yeah, I have I am ergonomic. I have an umbrella over me, so that helps. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
I would say, comfort, discomfort, ergonomics aside, it's also just like the unique things that have come up since COVID, which is really around people being productive, right? Like, at the beginning it was like, I can't be productive at home. My head's in the refrigerator every 5 seconds. I keep living on TikTok. I just, without that structure, it was really hard. for a lot. Others said this is the best thing that ever happened. And now it's interesting because there are people who said I'm much more productive in the office, but 3 years later, they're finding that to be a challenge. It's like, oh, I keep distracted. Oh, I'm like this is like it's weird again, you know. So this is sort of transition, which is I'm finding fascinating.
I've found it, like I knew, for instance, that I was not very productive at home. That's just never been me. But even I have evolved to the point that, yeah, to the point that you just made. I recognize that going to the office for me is very business social. Like there are a lot of conversations that happen during the day that are important to what I do because it's, you know, I manage workplace. But it means I don't get a lot done. And so what I'm starting to find is I think very differently about what I'm doing in the office versus what I'm doing at home. And now all of a sudden, I'm very productive at home because there's just so much that I didn't get done the day before.
Reversed.
It has reversed. But I think there are huge values to both, particularly, you know, just talking about my job, knowing how people are feeling about work, where they're working, what tools they need, you know, what struggles they have at home. Those are good conversations for me to have. I need to know those things. And I think people will tell me more personally than they'll ever do in a survey or in a Zendesk ticket or whatever. So I find that really valuable. So I am learning to work differently now. And I have to laugh because there are days like that. There are Fridays when I'm working till 6 o'clock. And I think it's Friday. I should be having a cocktail. Like, why am I still working? But there's stuff to do, you know.
I agree,
And I
Mike.
like
Like
that.
I call myself when I go into the office, it is that business socialization. You have to give yourself permission to do it.
Yes.
And so really some days I'll go in and never open my computer, but I will have some really great, powerful conversations that allow me then to kind of take that Friday or that Monday and do those action items. But really getting to know people on that personal or having that, you know, what is it? The collisions that are not planned and water cooler talks.
Water
Those
cooler
are really,
conversations. Yeah.
they're really powerful, and you can learn a lot about a person and what their challenges are, or overhearing a conversation that maybe you wouldn't have been privy to.
I think the evolution of work is going to be about that, really understanding what works for the individual in their job and how we can help support them in getting all of that done and getting people to, I think there's probably a little bit of an evolution about the office, but getting people to understand the benefit of both. You know, I don't think, well, Amy will disagree. I am not an advocate of everybody should be back in the office, but I want people to feel like the office is a great place to go. Like we would love, you know, we're not telling you have to come in, but we would really love to see you. When will you come in? You know, like I was on the phone just now with a coworker saying, "So, are you coming in soon?" She lives 2 or 3 hours away, so that's not a regular thing. And she said, "Oh, I don't have anything planned, but yeah, I'll look at my schedule." And you know, I encourage people to come in because that's what I, you know, offices are what I do.
I don't fully disagree with you. I mean, I think hybrid is more gives people more balance.
It
So,
does.
you
Yeah.
know, I think that it's nice to give people choice and control as to when they're coming in and making it valuable, right? If you're coming into the office, what is your end goal? You know, is it to have focus work? Is it to collaborate with people, be business social? What is it that you want to get out of it, and then plan for it and give yourself permission for that. So I think it just takes a lot more thought. Um, but I do think the power of being in, and we talked a little bit about mentorship. And when I look at the Gen Zers, they, you know, many of them went to college during Zoom in over the computer. You know, they never went into classes. A lot of them finished up their education that way. And so they're hungry for more social interaction. They want to learn, and they want to learn from the boomers. And if the boomers aren't coming in and the Gen Zers are there, how can they learn from them?
Right.
It's really hard to pick up from those conversations when you're over a Zoom.
I would beg to differ. Here we go. Because,
That's
you know,
why we're here.
no, no, well, look, there's something beautiful having seen colleagues or clients where you're like, oh my God, you have legs. This is amazing. And that was really powerful. Like I wanted to cry the first time I stepped back into a client site and saw people who I had never met in person. We had met over COVID and worked together. And maybe it's also the challenges of having had a remote company for however long it's been. So in our company, we have all different people, ages, backgrounds, experience. So you have to find ways to connect, which I'm telling you from experience, it's very doable. And we have, and I don't even know if it's an age thing or a generation thing. It's also an experience thing. Hey, I'm new to this space. I'm new to this field. And kind of learning through those of us who have been here longer. So, Slack is a beautiful thing. Zoom is a beautiful thing, but you have to learn to stay connected without interrupting people too, right? So kind of letting your team know, hey, this is when I'm online, this is when I'm offline. And I can tell you, I mean, you probably are experiencing it too, and I'm experiencing it firsthand and constantly pushing back over the back-to-back Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
They're killers. Like in all ways, So yes, I hear what you're saying, and I think it's invaluable to have human contact. And I know that when I'm even just working here and in touch with my team, I will still go down to the cafe and work for a couple hours just to be around people and to also physically get out of the house. So I think it's just whatever your situation is, to find strategies. And if you are fully remote and you're saying, hey, I want to be mentored, then I think it's really important to reach out to whoever it is you want to be mentored by and say, can we carve out time? I need contact, however that's going to be. Anyways, that's my 2 cents.
It does bring up an interesting point. This is a little bit controversial, but for the people who are very introverted, to be able to stay at home and work, is that the right thing? Like, are we just creating more opportunity for them to distance themselves from others? I don't know how healthy that is. That just kind of came to mind as you were talking about that.
That's interesting. I also think it's what the nature of your job is, right? You're doing something more soloistic, and you're an analyst, you're a coder, you're something where you actually need to go into the zone, and you aren't going to be distracted by people walking by or tapping you on the shoulder. Working from home is probably a dream.
But it's the work.
Like me, I have to figure out ways to get that fix that I need.
That would be the 3 of us do what we do.
Yeah.
I just worry about those people who then don't have the balance of stopping work, or going to the cafe. Like, I think there's a lot of opportunity for managers and people teams to help employees find balance, because I don't know that they always have it. That's kind of what I worry about, I think, is, and I always have to put this sort of disclaimer in there. We all recognize that we're talking about 25 or 30% of the population, right? Most people who work in a situation where they have to be at a place. We are, for the most part, office workers. That's a relatively small part of the world population that gets to even have this conversation. If you're a UPS driver or a server in a restaurant or a nurse, right? You got to go in. That's your job. So we have this sort of, I don't want to use the word elite, but that is kind of who we are.
I think there's a luxury to have that, but anyway, that's a whole nother podcast.
I was going to say that when you talk about balance, though, and I go back into the office talk, but the one thing that is nice about going into the office is you have that time, your commute time, to kind of decompress and remove yourself from the office. And when you're home, I know for myself, it's really hard to separate and pull myself away to make dinner or, to do something like that, because you can kind of get in the zone and be there forever. So I do appreciate the commute time, not necessarily traffic, but just the commute time.
Well, that's interesting you said that. By the way, I apologize working from home. There's some construction going on behind me on the other side of that. Also, anyway, hopefully you're not hearing the clangs of that. But anyway.
You don't need to apologize. We don't apologize for those things anymore. That's over.
Cool. All right. But anyway, so you know, you bring up a great point, and I think it cuts both ways. So there were really definite markers, right? You would pre-COVID, commuting full time or close to it. You had, you know, your morning routine, doing whatever you were going to do. You'd physically step out of your house. You would, however you got to work, you got to work. You would physically open a door, walk into it, and that's sort of the on switch. Now I'm at work. Do your work. Then there's that point where like you're going to get out of your desk, maybe go in a meeting room. You're going to hopefully go out to lunch or go to the cafeteria, you know. And then there's that marker at the end of the day. I'm going to walk out the doors, transition back home. And that's not to say people don't like go back online, when even then. But what we're hearing from our clients and the employees, the number one resistance to go back to the office is the commute. Which is
Yes.
really, so there's boundaries and having to be super disciplined so that work doesn't bleed into everything when you're at home, because it does. But that is the biggest thing. Like, I don't want to add 2 hours a day back into a commute. And, you know, I got into a different rhythm with myself or my kids or my family, or I have a young baby at home, or I have whatever the situation is. And others like you, like some people are like, I love it. I'm listening to my podcasts. I'm learning a language. I'm doing whatever. And they use that time. But that is probably the number one thing, that and getting dressed. Like, I have to buy real clothes. I have to put on shoes. But those are real barriers for people. And it costs money and gas and all that good stuff. So
I fully agree. I mean, gas was expensive, right? So you're like, oh, do I want to spend $20 and 2 hours of my time, you know, to go to and from work when I could stay home and be able to get 2 hours of work done?
Yeah.
So it's definitely
There's so many other things you can do with your day, right? You know, I have been trying to walk every day between 1 and 4 miles, and I got 2.5 miles in today. But you know, in order to do that and get to the office at a decent time, I have to get up at 5:30, which maybe I can do, but not every day. I will say this morning it was really hard. I trudged out the front door like, oh, I don't really want to walk today, but I got to get it in. But I think it's nice to have that balance and be able to do that on the days that I want.
You know what I'm hearing, what we're observing, and it's still really early. Who knows what's going to be in another year?
I think it's a really good point. It's very early.
It's
We
very
haven't figured this stuff out.
We're still
And it's-
testing it out. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's still going to evolve.
But we're starting to see a pattern just from a vantage point, again, of just like having sort of the ability to peer into so many different companies and styles. The companies that are mandating you have to be back 3 days a week or whatever the sort of structure is, are not getting they're getting more resistance from the employees, when other than if they say, hey, you decide when, or your team together is deciding when to come in. And I'm finding that when there's choice, or say, hey, we're going to have 3 buckets. You're fully remote, you're fully in the office, you're hybrid. And if you're here, you know, 2 days a week, you don't get an office, you get a hoteling shared situation. If you are here more than 3 days, you can apply for an assigned, you know, your own spot. So that's been interesting, because we're finding that those that give choice are meeting with more success, actually having people come back. So maybe that's part of the equation too.
We call it choice and control, right? We all want to have control of our lives and what we do. So by making it our idea, as opposed to them telling us what to do, I think is always a helpful solution.
Yeah. I think we're still hearing leaders who think we just have to get everybody back in the office. And my question is, what are you trying to solve for? Like, are you just trying to fill the building because you have a lease? I'm not really sure. It probably is, but I don't know that that's the right driver. I think that it's more complicated than that.
Philosophically, really believe that
the sun is shining, Amy.
It is. There's also like core philosophies, like, and also the nature of the business. Like, we're a creative business. We need the collaboration. We need that time together. Like those can be drivers too behind the, hey, you have to come back, you know. So
I definitely know of companies that are making the hybrid call or the remote first call, but also recognize that there are employees who should be in the office most days. You know, you alluded to it earlier, Amy. the young employees who don't have a lot of experience, who need the mentoring, who need the connection. But that also involves, as you said, the fact that their boss has to be there with them. So it's also this evolution of identifying who are the employees who really should be in every day, because culturally they need that connection. It's early career days, but they also need their manager. There's a lot that has to happen there. Again, it seems to me to be all about the individual and doing what is the best for that person and for the company as a whole. Like, what's the good balance there?
But I think you
Uh,
have to look at it as being equitable as well,
yes,
because you can create
totally.
some resentment and some divide if some people have to come in and some don't.
Very true. But as long as we understand what those parameters are and why, if you're communicating to everybody about why you're doing that, what is the purpose, and there's still flexibility to it, then it probably works. But I agree, Vivienne, that I think these companies that are mandating return, I don't see a lot of success there. I don't.
Yeah. I mean, people are coming, but then they're also looking for new jobs,
Mhm.
right? And the
Yeah.
flip side of that for companies is that, like, oh, I've just opened my talent pool globally, right? If people don't have to be tied to the office and I'm headquartered in Texas, I'm not
Yes.
limited to Texans. I can now, hire from wherever. So there's that reality too, you know. And we're starting to hear and Amy, you probably could speak to this better than all of us because you're in that design space, but looking at the office a little bit differently, not just, hey, this is where we're going to do our heads down work, but almost like we're starting to hear things of like, oh, we're using our things more as event spaces,
That's
and not just events for our employees or teams, or hey, we want to gather everybody here once, twice a year, whatever, but for their customers.
mhm.
Hey, come on in. So, Amy, I'd be curious what you're seeing if you're seeing a shift towards that.
Absolutely. Well, we're testing a lot of different types of solutions. And again, it depends on the company. But if you have a company that says they want to be virtual first, then they are converting their office spaces into these different types of event spaces, right? And creating more. So when you come in, it's for a meeting, it's for collaboration, it's for connecting. What does that look like?
Yeah.
That has actually taken off. And some companies are coming together and doing it jointly, utilizing that real estate, not just for my company, but for somebody else, like so that you can really help share. I mean, real estate's not cheap in this area. So how do you utilize that space as a real destination for your employees to come into? Another thing that we're looking at is like, these multi-use areas where you work, you play, and you live. And so how do you create zones so that people can come in and meet with one another close to their home, but give them that little bit of a professional feeling?
I think I would love to do a couple of podcasts dedicated to that subject as a whole, because it feels like that is a very early stage process and everybody's learning. I don't, off the top of my head, and correct me, Amy, if I'm wrong, I don't know that anybody's been really successful at it yet. And there are certainly companies who've spent a lot of money uh, and haven't been successful or aren't really seeing the benefit yet. So there's a lot of, flying by the seat of your pants, sort of testing things out to see what will work. It just has to,
Yeah,
but it does have to be a good experience when you're in the office.
totally. And there's another reality, which is the financial piece of it. So I know my husband during the pandemic got out of his lease, and he's an office guy. He likes commuting. I'm like, who likes commuting? Who likes going on the New York City subway twice a day? But he does, and he thrives with his group around him. And he hates working at home. Like, we used to say good morning, and now we say, hi, what's your schedule? What's your meeting? Because we have to do that dance here. We're in an apartment in New York City, right? And there's only one room that actually you can like shut the door other than the bathroom. And I don't want to work in the bathroom. But anyway, but then they looked at the bottom line when they started to think maybe we should reopen. And they were like, the cost saving was staggering. So there's that reality. But what they're finding now is they're testing the waters with co-working spaces.
Yes.
And so that's something that's starting to emerge again. So
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get a co-working space because everybody's moving into that world, and that's going to be very challenging. I see more of that. It's funny you bring up sort of the how do you balance at home. We were traveling, we were away with friends in a my wife and I with in a rental in a Airbnb kind of thing. And every morning we would have to get up and have a quick conversation about what we were doing that day because there were only so many places to work. And well, I'm not doing any calls right now, so I'll sit at the kitchen table. You can have the office down, like there was this shuffle all day long. Okay, we have 3 minutes to shuffle. I've got to go in this room, you got to go in that room. So we could all work. We were working while we were away. And it was very funny. Just trying to figure out how to do it,
oh,
You know what
totally.
I wanted to bring up too is it is an interesting, like, prior, a lot of companies just had a 1-to-1 ratio. Everybody had their own desk and their own
Yes,
space.
right.
And now, Vivienne, you were talking about, well, if you come in less than 3 days, you're going to be in hoteling. But what people are saying is, even if I do that, I want my own space, right? I want my desk. How do you give them the best of both worlds? How do you give them their space to call their own, but also a space for them to collaborate and kind of me versus we, right? How do you give them the best of both of those? And it's challenging because that then increases the square footage per employee.
That is a great podcast topic right there. I definitely have thoughts on that and sort of see what's working and what's not. But it would be kind of cool to maybe end on this note. If all of us give our prediction where we think we'll be in a year from now. What do you think? And not we, the like what do you think is going to continue
I think we're
morphing
still
into?
learning. I will say we're still testing and learning.
I think more companies will have made a more definitive decision and communicated that. But I agree. I think we would still be learning. I think the real estate component of it, and of course, this is another whole podcast I think we could do, will continue to evolve and be pretty dramatic. People are going to move. People are going to let leases terminate. People are going to go to co-working instead of an office. So I think we're in a constant state of flux. I say all the time, I don't think we're going to have this kind of dialed in until after I've retired. This just it's a long process. A good one, I think an interesting one. And I will say, I think one that we were going to anyway. The world of how we work and where we work and the tools we need was changing. We just didn't really talk about it yet.
Mhm.
If I had to guess, I would say I don't know yet either, but I think there's going to be some. I think hybrid will emerge as the sort of winner in whatever that's going to look like.
Yes.
Whether it's once a month, a few times a year, twice a week, with a lot of flex in there. So we'll see. We'll circle back to each other a year from now.
Well, I think we're going to wrap up for today. Say thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you again soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks.